And yeah, I guess we can start. I'll do a quick introduction. I'm
Yeah.
David Katzel. I help coordinate the BC Seed Security Program with a few other people, including Jolene and Lisa, who are on this call. And I farm out in Aldergrove and have all three of the citizen seed trial crops growing at the BC Seeds hub site in the Lower Mainland here.
I'll introduce myself next. I'm Lisa. Excuse me. I'm on the island and I'm growing the cilantro, and also I did grow the lettuces, and then last year I grew some of the kale that Jen had given me, and I'm growing it again, but I did like a late seeding of it. So I got some seeds from it in the spring this year, but didn't have an active kale through the summer.
Hi, I'm Jolene. I'm the Northern Seed Security Coordinator with Farm Folk City Folk. I'm based out of the Kispiox Valley, which is north of Smithers, BC, so the northern contingent. And I'm growing all three trials as well. Lots of the kale, and the seed team added a few more cilantro varieties, so I think we're up to about 5 or 6. And I think I found with the cilantro, I found the tasting really interesting between to actually note the flavors. I was like, oh wait, I like that flavor in cilantro, and this one doesn't have that. So like a citrusy flavor. Um, yeah. You want me to get started on the
Sure, yeah. Let's jump
slides?
into
Sure.
our breeding
Yeah.
process.
So welcome everybody. We're going to talk about breeding projects today, kind of focusing on one of our citizen seed trial varieties, which is the Craig Psychedelic Kale, and Jen's going to share a bit about that. Before we get into that, we'll just do a little bit of an overview on plant breeding and a couple other projects that some of the seed team are working with or aware of, or maybe you've tried out before, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end or some discussion around other parts of the citizen seed trial. Before we get going, I just want to acknowledge that we are working with seeds, and the seeds that we are working with have often been stewarded by people long before us, often Indigenous communities who may have been displaced but may have still continued to do the seed work. And so just to be really grateful for that. Um, the words of Rowan White always stick with me, that seeds like land can't be seeded, and in Indigenous culture, seeds are often considered relatives. And even though working with seeds, they can often be commodified, and we think of them that way, and they are part of an economy of sharing as well. So just to kind of remember that they've been with us for a long time, and we need to continue to treat them and nurture them as we move forward. And so it's really exciting to be working on these projects together because seeds are evolving alongside us. We're going to talk a bit about different cultivars today. So just as a definition of a cultivar, it's a cultivated variety. So, lettuce are all the same species, but we have very many different kinds of lettuce that they might be genetically related, but they're very distinct because we've selected for different traits over time. And we have our unique like butterheads or if you look at brassicas would be a good example for today. If you look at Brassica oleracea, where you have cauliflowers and Brussels sprouts, and like that selection that's taken place over time, again over generations, is really interesting, and how we end up with these unique varieties. And that process doesn't just stop. We can still continue to find new varieties and keep cultivating. Um, so we often talk here about heirloom cultivars, which basically they're always going to be open pollinated, and the definition of an heirloom is kind of that it has to have been around for about 50 to 100 years, depending on who you ask. So there's something that has been stewarded for a long time. And it's the neat thing about heirlooms and also open pollinated cultivars is that they hold certain traits, and so we want to continue to save seed from them because we know which traits they have. And then if we are working on breeding, we can go to those cultivars and use them for breeding purposes. On the other hand, hybrid cultivars have a lot more complications going into them. They have two very inbred parent lines. The next generation is all identical to each other, so you know exactly what you're going to get. A lot of uniformity, and it's a really controlled process, and often the parent lines are protected, so they're very difficult to breed with, because if you save the seed, you'll end up with a really diverse population, or you'll end up with a lot of variability in your next generation because you've lost those two inbred parent lines. And you can still breed with them, but you're working with most likely a smaller gene pool. We were kind of discussing this before we got on, that hybrids, in a way, they have a lot of variability, but that doesn't necessarily translate to genetic diversity. And I'll explain a bit more about that. If anybody has questions as we go along, feel free to throw into the chat. We're happy to just kind of have conversations as we go. So yeah, with when you're breeding with an open pollinated species, you could start with a lot of different parent lines, and they could be from very unique looking cultivars. So you could introduce a lot of genetic diversity into your population. There's a term called mass selection, where you might start with even like dozens of different dozens of varieties and let them all cross with each other that have unique characteristics, and kind of see what comes out and start selecting and finding the traits that you might be looking for. And the cool thing about that is that all those genetics can also adapt to your environment, and that's how you get land race varieties and genetically or environmentally adapted varieties. Whereas the hybrids are often bred to be like vigorous in their first generation, and if they don't have the conditions they want, though, they'll all kind of fail. So, however, again, if you take the generation after that, you'll get that variability again, and you can try to save some of those characteristics that the hybrid has. It just might take a while. And same thing with any breeding project. When you're trying to stabilize the variety, you could be looking at 5 to 15 years before you find something. Or I think David might comment that, and many other breeders might say that it's never finished.
I also just want to mention, because we're talking here often about crossing two different varieties as breeding, and seed saving work is breeding work as well. Even if you're just working with one variety, if you're doing it well, then you're doing breeding work as well. You're selecting for it. And even if you don't pay much attention, the weather is probably selecting for you. So just to throw that out there.
And the varieties we start breeding and crossing today might be the future heirlooms. So heirlooms don't just stop in time.
Mm.
And at the end of the today, we'll also talk about like where to find. It can be a little intimidating to like start a new breeding project, but there are people who are working on breeding projects, and you can kind of continue them on, which is a little easier to do when you're working with less space and you just want to start with a really diverse population and let it adapt to where you are. So just if you're looking at purchasing seed and finding seed for your breeding project, just remembering you probably want to work with open pollinated seed, unless there's a characteristics in a hybrid you're really interested in. And you can also cross a dehybrid project with an open pollinated. Hybrids should be marked on the packets. You should see an F1. And otherwise, if it doesn't say F1 or that it's a hybrid, then it's most likely an OP, and you could save the seed from it, and you know you'll still get that same cultivar if you don't let it cross. So the project I work on at the farm is purple peacock sprouting broccoli, and this is bred by Frank Morton of Wild Garden Seeds. And this was a cross of green Goliath broccoli and two different kinds of kale. And it's a summer broccoli that has a lot of variability, which I love, because it means that every time I save seed, again, even though I'm saving from a somewhat stable population, it's going to keep adapting to what does best here. And as you can see from the photos, there's still a lot of variability, which I think is really cool. Uniformity is desirable if you are growing on like a uh, industrial scale and you need everything ready at the same time to be machine harvested. But in your garden and even small market gardeners, I think it's fun to have this variability. So this is just the description from the Wild Garden Seed Catalog. The other cool characteristic this broccoli has is the flavor is really sweet and doesn't have a lot of that cruciferous bitterness or mustardiness. Um, I don't know if it's mellowed out by the kale, but it's just an amazing flavored broccoli. I really like growing it. And you can also eat the leaves. I'll pass on to David to talk about.
Okay, yeah, this has been my longest running teacher in seed work, I think. It was in about 2004, we had a crop of Brussels sprouts in the field that we forgot to harvest, and it all went to seed. And I thought, well, I might as well save the seed from the Brussels sprouts. And that winter, I was at a 2-day workshop with John Navaggio up at UBC. And on the second day, we were talking about Brassica oleracea. And I suddenly realized as I pictured the field that I saved these Brussels sprout seeds in that were flowering at the same time as white peacock kale and purple peacock kale, both hybrids, collards, lacinato kale, about 3 kinds of those. I realized I didn't have Brussels sprouts, but I had something else. So at the same workshop, somebody asked if it's possible to make a open pollinated white peacock kale, and the answer was a resounding almost impossible. So I thought I'd give it a try because that's what farmers tend to do. So the following year I took those Brussels sprout seeds. I planted 20 flats of them, 100 plants per flat. So started off with 2,000 individuals. And when they were just about 3 inches tall in the seedling stage, I only planted the ones that looked like white peacock kale. And I only planted 100 out of the 2,000 plants. So I did a huge selection on the first year. And then basically year after year, I've just been sort of selecting for this white frilly characteristic. I feel like over the years I've lost a little bit of the Brussels sprout characteristic. So this year I'm actually going to cross it again back with 2 different types of Brussels sprouts, both open pollinated, one purple and one green, just to mix it up again. But this has been going on for, yeah, close to 20 years now, keeping in mind a biennial crop, you only get to save seed every 2 years, and inevitably you miss a year, there's a crop failure. So I probably saved it 8 different times is my guess. And it's still very diverse, but it's become more and more uniform. The other thing that happens with these breeding projects is you might have an idea of what you're selecting for, and then the plant sort of shows up in a new way. So I thought I was selecting for, a frilly white peacock kale. I wasn't really thinking about winter tolerance or winter hardiness until one season we had a terrible winter kill that killed almost all of our kale in the field, and which doesn't happen that often in the lower mainland, but not a single one of these plants were damaged. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we've got some winter hardiness here from those Brussels sprout genes. So it's I just encourage people to if you're feeling intimidated to get into a breeding project, do it for the sake of your own education, because you can learn so much over the years of just doing this and saving seed. And there's no failure really. I've gotten all of the failed plants I've been able to eat. So you're developing food out of all your failures anyway. So that was that project. Yeah.
Yeah, these are, oh, I'll let Lisa talk about the lettuce.
Sure, yeah. This is just from our lettuce trial. So citizen seed trial participants who took the lettuce got to try with us to see how much crossing there was in this lettuce. It was planted at David's farm, I think, where they had like this type of lettuce, both types just growing right next to each other, red and a green, and seeing how much crossing actually happens. Because when we save seed from lettuce, we're usually making sure it's 10 feet apart and all this stuff, but we wanted to actually see how much it will cross. So the answer we got is not very much, but maybe about 1% or so. And that was 1% crosses. Like the one on the left is from mine. I didn't get any. Actually, no, I did have one plant that had some color variation, but it died. So there went that. But I did have this one plant that's like a very different texture from all the other sort of green leaves. So just some different genetics there. It might be from, genes from the red, because the red looks a little spikier to me, but it's hard to say. And then David, yours is in the middle there, right?
Yeah. So those all came from the green seeded plants. So I got 3 reds. I think I planted about 250. So got the 3 reds, yeah. And I got one red. I got 1 green in the red and 3 reds in the green.
Oh. Yeah, I got one red and the green, and that's the one on the right. So I put it into the greenhouse in hopes of getting some seed out of it. It's getting pretty tall, so it's getting close to flowering. It's a little tricky up north to get lettuce seed, so we'll see. Especially from these varieties, which tend to be fairly non-bolting.
Yeah, totally. That's what mine has not bolted, and I don't think it's going to, but it was worth noticing. So still a fun
It
time.
might survive the winter. There's a chance. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we'll pass it on to you, Jen, if we're really excited to hear more about the story behind Craig's Psychedelic Kale.
Great. And I think somebody else is sort of in charge of my slides, I believe.
I've got the clicker here.
That's great.
Just give me like
So-
a sign.
Yeah. So then there's Craig and Craig and I, and of course indirectly Lisa, because of the mobile seed unit there. You can probably go to the next slide.
The slides are a little delayed, but that's okay. We can wait. There we go.
Yep. And then so with the farm that I work with is called Growing Opportunities. And so we're a farm that engages folks in agriculture. And so one of the things that you've got a picture of here is just some of our production. And so you can see one of our students there who's got a whole heckload of kale sprouts being ready to be transplanted. That's a part of the Psychedelic Kale project. And then on the other side, we've got the opposite end of the season there. We've got a bunch of students who are helping us to collect up some of the seeds. You can go to the next slide. And the way that the Psychedelic Kale was created was Craig started in the greenhouse and had Japanese ornamental kale growing there, and grew it out so that the ornamental kale like forced it through another season, and then that allowed it to then be flowering at the same time as when the red Russian kale were flowering that spring. So all of the greenhouse Japanese ornamental kales came out of the greenhouse, and then they were all in pots and went out in the same field as where all the red Russian kale were hanging out. And then I had bees at the time, and it helped to cross them all up. And then that was sort of the start of the Psychedelic Kale, was just a big experiment to sort of see. The way that it turned out was that we kind of got the best of both worlds. And so with the ornamental kale, it offered a lot of leaf variation and shapes and sizes, a lot of color, and a lot of winter hardiness. And the red Russian kale gave it its kale sort of character and the flavor. And then fortunately, the red Russian kale did not donate its tendency to get powdery mildew, which was a nice cross for us because it meant that we had kales that were really winter hardy and that didn't really mildew up in the fall. So we sort of got the best of all the kales that we thought, and sort of like David, like we really appreciate, and the and other folks on the call here today, we really appreciate having that diversity and the variety, and it sure livens up the field to have those to have the psychedelic kale growing there year after year. We've probably saved it every year for since about 2008, maybe 2009. So it's been going for like close to, I guess that's 15, 16 years now. And so, and every year we've got a little bit more genetics goes into our mix. And so, like you, David, I'm sort of at that point now of sort of thinking, well, maybe I should grow out some Japanese ornamentals and then like recross it up again. I think I might like to do that. And I wasn't sure what seed Craig started with. I don't know if his seed was open pollinated or not when we started the whole shebang. So we might have gotten like some other genetics in there that we just don't know, because I'm sure there's like some hybrid varieties of the Japanese ornamentals. So you can go to the next slide.
We were speculating before the call, Jen, that it probably was hybrid. I haven't seen a lot of, or I haven't seen any OP like those ornamental kales.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be my guess.
Yeah, and this was, back quite a few years when there's probably less OPs around. And then here you can see that that it definitely was winter hardy. And it's ended up just being a really nice kale. You can go to the next slide. And here, this just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the different of the diversity of the kales that we get. So we get and even more diversity than that is actually available like in what it is that we grow. So some of them are all white, similar to the white peacock that you've got going, David, and some of them look like a lot like sort of standard purple lacinato type varieties, and then we get everything that's sort of in between, like vibrant neon pinks and everything in between. So it's like quite a diversity in terms of that. And on the call a little bit earlier, that we had, Lisa was mentioning that she had noticed that the colors really come out after the winter. Like you don't necessarily get as much vibrancy in the colors before they get a good frost on them, but it sure does. It sure is vibrant after a good winter season. You can go to the next slide. And yeah, just more pictures of the winter time. You can see it there. That year we kind of over harvested our kale, but we still had enough for seeds the following year. And you can go to the next slide. And over the years, the one thing that I have noticed has been a few like maybe 5 or 10% of the varieties that tend to get kind of brustly, like they'll kind of get a little bit of a Brussels characteristics in there. I'm not sure exactly where that's come from, but like I'm just finding that it just kind of, it's been evolving over time and shifting, which has been really cool. And then it's because it's kale and you can grow a lot of kale pretty easily, and then you can get a lot of seed from kale pretty easily, then it allows us to do it. And it's a pretty easy crop to harvest in terms of seed in a way, once you have an air separator around. Then it's a great one to send like folks who haven't done harvesting before out into the field to just help out with that harvest, because most folks don't really have a sense of seed saving. And so to have an opportunity for them to go out and sort of see what that's like and be hands-on, I think has been a really great benefit for a lot of the work that we've done in the community and for just raising up some of the community awareness around seed. So that's been a really good benefit of just having kale about for that purpose. You can go to the next slide. And I know that it's been like lots of fun for folks too. And so, yeah, I have told stories like from some of the Organic Seed Saving Alliance. Like when I heard that they used tractors to go over some of their seed in order to thresh it, we tried stomping on it, and that seemed to work pretty well. We never really used a tractor, but it's like another good part of just being able to save the seeds too. And you can see there a little bit of some of the different types of kale type that we get in the field just from the bunches there. And for other projects, we've got a drought tolerant Roma type variety. And so we're having tons of fun with that. And so last year we had a Roma type tomato grow in a spot where it never got watered and still produced like a fair number of tomatoes off of that plant. The tomatoes, of course, were smaller, but I was just like, I took a page out of Frank Morton's playbook and saved those seeds. And now we're growing out some of those seeds to sort of see does it continue to be drought tolerant, and who knows, maybe they'll go up into space just like his outrageous seed did. And then from the variety trials, like, boy, has that ever been like a wonderful source of genetics at our farm too. And so like we've grown out carrots and then one year we grew out the leeks. So we had like 11 or 12 varieties of the leeks. And then we just let all those folks go to seed. And then we've been saving seed from those 11 or 12 varieties and just figuring out how much we like all the different types of leeks and the variations in genetics there. And we've been just having like a riot doing that. So and we've got leeks in the field this year that will save and then pass along to BC EcoSeed. So we're feeling pretty good about those genetics and about having a little bit of variety. Although like with leeks, I don't find that it's not as variety as the kale offers. So, but there's still lots of fun to save. So that's sort of the story of the breeding project that we've been doing. I don't think that we've been as we do a little bit of selection with it, David, but I wouldn't say that we've done a lot of selection. I think we've just been enjoying that we have these vibrant colors in the kale and the diversity in the shapes, and we see it as being like a really healthy population. I know it's probably closer to something like a landrace, but it's not really our goal to stabilize the genetics in that particular population, at least not right now. Although one day if I got more organized, I think I might try to do that.
Yeah, you have to wonder what the purpose is. And if you're going out there to pick kale bunches, you don't really need a uniform, population. I did want to ask Jen, over the years of saving seed, because you said you've saved it quite a few times, were there other like Brassica oleracea flowering in the field as well? Like would you have, so potentially throughout the years you could have had like some of that lacinato cross in and that kind of thing?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely there's lacinato in that mix now because I think one year we did a lacinato variety trial at the farm. And so some of those genetics would have
Mhm.
popped into our mix on that scale too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we're like very we're sort of like the Canadian version of kale, like everybody's welcome. Very multicultural as kale goes.
Right on. If there's any questions, feel free to raise your hand or throw it in the chat or just speak up if you want.
I'm curious as to if any of the CST participants had like colorful kale, or if you haven't seen that expression of it yet.
I'm seeing some neat lacinato types that have like a really beautiful ribbing to it, like really nice purpley and pink deep colors on the veins. And a few with kind of like the frillier edges, but nothing, yeah, not a lot of white or pinks in the leaves yet, but we'll see once we cool down.
Mm-hmm. I ended up planting mine. I was telling these guys that they when they were just a few inches tall, I kind of tried to separate them into phenotypes. So I have one section of like frilly purple, one section that's like lacinato purple, and then a green frilly and a green lacinato, and then the mix of whatever other ones I couldn't categorize. And as they've grown up, they've held fairly true to those phenotypes. Like it's not so hard to tell at a very small age whether they're going to be, can often tell by the stem color whether it's going to be
Mhm.
purple or white. And so you can do a lot of selection when the plants are tiny. It's just after you plant them out, it takes up so much space. It's often useful to do that selection in the small plants. I noticed Robin mentioned in the chat that hers has been all green with purple stems. Excited to see after frost. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
another part. IUIO also the same thing.
Even those ornamental, the bright kales, they all start out pretty green. So it is, as a winter crop, they'll probably color up a fair bit.
Yeah, probably after the first couple of frosts.
Oh, and here's Shauna mentioned that they just started them a few weeks ago to overwinter in a school garden.
Mm.
Which is often something I've heard. If you want plants, kale to overwinter, plant them a bit later so they're actually a bit smaller going through the winter.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that works for up north a bit better because the thicker stems tend to get either chewed off or
They
broken
snap.
off and they stay
Yeah.
above the snow line. Yeah.
Mm.
Whereas if they're young enough, they get kind of protected, and if there's enough root system in there to survive the winter, they can come back.
Mm.
Um, want to acknowledge these beautiful photos and that it's really been great to grow this as part of the legacy of Craig's breeding project. And I'm really glad we were able to share that with participants this year
Mhm.
and through the Citizen Seed Trial, and have so many people now connected to this legacy.
Yeah, it's the best way to honor Craig, that's for sure. It was such a meaningful choice, and I really, really appreciated that that it went into the trial this year. It's just such a beautiful way of honoring him.
I can't wait to see more photos of people's results and see what happens next year when we continue to see what we get seed from or what survives or what other traits we start to notice.
Yeah,
Um,
mine were so beautiful in the spring. So if you haven't seen too much color variation yet, maybe it'll come.
I forgot I threw this slide in here. It's about OC. Often when there's a new breeding line, the breeders will pledge it to OC to keep it open and available for other people to use for breeding, because if a new variety comes out and it's got it could be patented or have breeders' rights on it, it actually means that not only are you not supposed to save the seed, you also can't use it for breeding. Seed laws are complicated and yeah, confusing and not in line with the legacy of seed being passed on through people and evolving along us. But so if you're interested in varieties that have been pledged to OC, you can check out their website. It's just kind of an honoring system, an honor system, basically.
I have listed that white winter kale sprout with Aussie, so that is listed as an Aussie seed.
Oh, right
So
on. I should do the same with the psychedelic.
I was gonna suggest, I bet Craig would be into that too.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a bit of an honor system because people aren't sure how it would hold up in court necessarily, but I think it's the it's the gesture I think is really important.
A nice thing to look for when you're looking for varieties as well, just to kind of support. It also supports the breeder in some ways. If folks are growing that seed, like the BC Eco Seed Co-op carries some OC varieties, and I think a portion of that goes to OC or to the breeder. Um, And if you are looking for varieties that have unique characteristics and you want to kind of start partway through someone else's breeding project or see new varieties that have been developed in the last years, these are some sources that I've found. Wild Garden Seeds, of course. The Experimental Farm Network has lots of, they even have a whole section of breeding projects. And the OC website, the co-op right in BC here, it carries the winter kale sprouts and also the broccoli and I think some other OC pledge. There's the beet breeding project, which came out of a trial, I believe, of a bunch of beet varieties that were allowed to cross. And there's a kale breeding mix in there as well. No Craig Psychedelic Kale yet. There's also Going to Seed, which is a website that's, or a kind of a new organization that's evolved out of landrace breeding through Joseph Lofthouse, which is basically letting everything cross and just kind of like having as much diversity as possible. And you could take that seed and again, and let it kind of grow where you are and adapt to where you are and see what comes out of it. Especially if you're growing in a farm, uniformity is not so important.
I'm going to add one more link into the chat just because it wasn't in the slides, but No Coast Seeds in the Prairies is a Canadian company. And under the No Coast Seeds Originals, those are basically landrace breeding crosses that that he's started and happy to share.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't see the questions in the chat. They're not coming up. Oh, maybe because I'm in presenter. But we were hoping to gather again, probably not until October, once we get through the seed trailer season, and just to share the results from the different trials, like the cilantro and observations from the kale and lettuce trials. So stay tuned for that. Don't forget to enter your results if you are having any issues with seedling, or if you have any questions now about any of the breeding projects, feel free to throw those in the chat or unmute yourself. We're a small enough group. We can just chat. A tip on lettuce seed saving is to keep it dry if you're getting kind of if you've got seed that's almost ready and you get a wet system coming through, it tends to get moldy really quickly and it can be a bit dusty and messy. It also ripens sequentially, so you can kind of get seed as you go. So if it's about to rain, try to collect any of the good seed off of it first.
And then just as a method of doing that, if you have a Rubbermaid tote and you hold it near the flower head and you just slap the side of the flower head, you can usually, without damaging the head too much, you can get all the seeds into the tote.
Yeah, we talked about some kale overwintering. Do you have any other suggestions? Like, is there anything you do, or do you just, Jen, or do you just live somewhere where kale overwinters without trying too hard?
Yeah, I'm in Nunavut territory where the farm is, so Nanaimo, and so that so things tend to overwinter, although we do get some snows going on. So there have been a couple years where we just sort of like put together like just sort of like a MacGyvered kind of polytunnel over some of our rows just to stop the snow from falling directly onto the plants and causing them to snap. And so that it worked a little bit, but it wasn't super effective. Outside of that, we haven't really done much. Like often like our plants are pretty tall heading into the the fall and then into the winter time. Sometimes what we found is like with like we used to call them old growth kale, like they'll kind of lay down on the path a little bit, and so then they're sort of like closer to the ground, and then everybody just gets like sort of underneath the blanket of snow but without getting kind of snapped. And so for the ones that kind of like to lean over and lie down, then that actually works really well if you're trying to grow things out for seed or that you're hoping to sort of see how they go. But yeah, there isn't really we don't really have a strategy. They seem to be pretty strong plants no matter, and there'll be enough of the plant that kind of survives like a even heavy snow or snow and rain and all of that other type of stuff, that we'll still get plants that do pretty well, and then they keep and produce enough seed for us. Even the last year or two, like the year that you were talking about, David, when a lot of the kales got wiped out, like we had more get wiped out at that point than some years, but still had lots of kale
Mm.
and yeah. I guess we're growing like in a couple of acres, but we don't have to be too shy in terms of space necessarily. And so I guess part of our strategy is that the numbers are so high that you're going to get the percentage, even if you have a high percentage that get wiped out, you still have enough that you're going to have enough of a population that things go well. Yeah.
Yeah, we
So,
have
and
a
this
lot of
person talking about
diversity.
mulch. Yeah. We've also done like plastic mulch in previous years, and I think that that might have helped to increase survival for us, but we're not really doing as much plastic mulch now.
There's a question about the seed trailer, about sharing more. Anything more specific that you're interested in hearing about the seed trailer?
Maybe we should just say what it is.
Sorry, yeah, I was just wondering what it is, and it says
Oh,
a stop near you, so I was wondering what is it and where does it stop?
oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. So it's one of the programs we run. We've been doing it for a few years. There's 3 trailers, and we're going to be taking them on. I think the island has 2 weeks of a tour, and in the interior, though, it'll be driving around for probably 10 days. And up north, Jolene's driving a trailer around. So the trailers have some form of thresher on them, and then multiple different types of seed cleaning equipment. There's a link Jolene just put in the chat there. You can see a list of all the types of equipment. They're not in all the trailers, but all the trailers have like an air separator and a set of screens and an office clipper to separate stuff out. And then a winnow wizard, which is just it's a high-tech yet DIY seed cleaning machine. Yeah, so we drive around to different events. It might be at a farmer's market. We might we have, for example, there's a stop at the Creston Community Seed Bank where they just have they grow a lot of seeds for their seed bank we clean. But then we also stop at different farmers farms who are growing seed for sale, and they'll use the equipment to clean seeds.
And pretty soon we'll have we'll just publish the approximate dates. So if there are any public events, you're welcome to come and meet us at one of those public events. And they'll be on our website soon. We're just working on that.
Yeah, it will be. I noticed, Anne, you're at you're in Surrey, BC. We will be at, I don't know if you're going to our Feast of Fields event, but we will have the seed trailer there. Because that farm wants to clean seeds for a couple days after the event. So if by chance you're gonna be there, you'll be able to see it. Um, yeah, and please take photos of your crops in the field as they're as they're maturing. It's great to see the stuff on Facebook, but yeah, feel free to send them to us. If you're using SeedLinked for the cilantro, you can add photos to that as well.
Hopefully everybody's getting to eat some kale, and there are other breeding projects too. Getting ready for maybe for dinner tonight.
I think
Oh.
it's a request for a Facebook link here. I think that
I got it.
okay, great.
Thanks also to
And
Robin.
that's all an ongoing group, so the results from previous years or the discussion from previous years is there too.
Mhm.
And I know I'll see Shauna at one of our mobile seed cleaning stops because we're stopping on Galliano. I'm going to do some things with her school group, so that'll be fun. Thanks for coming to our webinar, Shauna.
And Robin, just to answer your question, the white winter kale sprouts are available through BC Eco Seed Co-op. I will just drop a link in the chat in case you need to find that company. And I believe that's where Jen's going to be selling her seeds through. Which one did you say you're harvesting this year, Jen? For
Well, we'll have kale seed for sure, and then we'll also have leeks available this year, and maybe some tomatoes depending on how it goes.
are you offering this kale seed, like the Craig Psychedelic?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, awesome. That's great. Well, maybe I'll cross that one with my white winter kale sprouts just to really
That'd
make
be fun.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see it in another 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, big thanks to Jen. Thanks for sharing the story of that. We really appreciated that.
Yeah, well, thanks for putting such a fun opportunity together. It's been awesome.
Okay. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Evening. Bye.